And the same way that if you play me a guitar lick and you can tell when it's BB King bending that string, you can tell when it's Neil Gaiman writing the prose. All right, guys, welcome back to the last video that's going to be taking place in this room because we are in the middle of moving. And after this, we're going to be in our new house doing the reviews in a brand new location. So super exciting. Hopefully the next location won't be so messy and disoriented in the background, but who knows? So today, guys, is the first time, I believe, on this channel that we are reviewing one of my favorite authors of all time. I'm probably going to bring this up more and more as time goes on, because he played a major role in inspiring me creatively, opening my eyes to what fantasy could be, kind of defining the aspect of fantasy that I ever cared about, and capturing it in a modern, dark, twisted, but also whimsical way, in a way that I don't see anybody else, or hadn't seen anybody else up to that point doing, and really went against the grain of what traditional fantasy was. And that author is Neil Gaiman. Neverwhere being his first major novel, I wanted to see how he translated his idea into a novel-length work. I wanted to see where the rough edges were on the earlier stages of his novel writing, before American Gods, before Stardust, Anansi Boys, Graveyard Book, Coraline, all these fantastical behemoths in their field. And which is strange to say, because when you say in their field, like, are we even really talking fantasy? Most of the fantasy, if you say fantasy today, people are going to think Game of Thrones, they're going to think Wheel of Time, they're going to think Brandon Sanderson, they're going to think George R.R. Martin, Robert Jordan, all these things. They're not going to think of Neil Gaiman. And that's what really struck me about Gaiman, was the way that he approached fantasy, the way he approached things really, really spoke to me. One of the comparisons that this book has on the back is saying that it's kind of a modern, dark, underground Alice in Wonderland that takes place in London. Completely get where that is coming from, because you really get that vibe from it. But thinking back, the first book that I ever read when I was younger that really, really hit me was Alice in Wonderland. I loved falling through this well into this otherworldly, magical, whimsical place where very interesting things were discussed, very fantastical adventures were had, and it was just a great, fantastic time. And Neil Gaiman captured a lot of that. So what happens in Neverwhere? Basically, we follow Richard Mayhew, and Richard Mayhew seems to have some sort of generic office trading job in London, and he has a fiance who is, we'll call her high maintenance and difficult maybe for Richard to keep up with. You really get the sense that his fiance is somebody who he thought he ought to be with, instead of the person to make him feel fulfilled and happy with his life. That fulfillment is going to come when he runs into a girl who is beaten on the ground. She seems a little bit bizarre. She's talking about some stuff that's happening to her that doesn't make sense to Richard, and Richard has to take it upon himself to help her. Now, when Richard stumbles across her, this girl, whose name is Dor, and she is one of the main characters. When he stumbles across Dor, he is with his fiance at the time, and he actually leaves his fiance to help this girl on the street, and his fiance doesn't understand why he's doing this. And it kind of gives us that intro glimpse into who Richard is and what he's willing to put aside for the things that he finds important. Now, his involvement with Dor ends up sending him through this rabbit hole, the same rabbit hole that Alice in Wonderland would have taken. He enters into the world that Dor was a part of. So London is separated into two places. There's London above and London below. And I believe concepts like this have been really taken and run with more recent authors. I believe, I haven't read V.E. Schwab, but I believe one of her books, maybe the one that brought her to prominence, I was reading like the back cover for it at the bookstore one time, and it was talking about having several different types of Londons. That very much reminded me of kind of Neverwhere, where you have, you know, various types of Londons and things operate differently within them. Now, there's only two of them here, right? You have a London above and a London below. And London below is kind of, it's interesting. It's super cool because on one hand, you have all these forgotten kind of people from the real world that have slipped through the cracks and are stuck there. But also you have this coming to life of areas in London that become real people. Earl's Court is an actual thing. Hammersmith is a person. You end up running into people and places whose titles are actual places and key aspects of London, but they've been brought to life in this different way. They've been manifested into people or places or trials or tribes or fiefdoms or all kinds of different inner workings of London below that makes it feel like you're very much like Alice in Wonderland, like you're caught in this web of this ecosystem that we have no idea how it works, and it's not explained to you, but there are certain interactions throughout the book that kind of give you tastes of how things work. Now, once Richard is kind of swept into London below, he becomes invisible to all the people in London above, so he is kind of stuck with Dor and stuck with her on her journey, and then you learn that she's being chased by these two individuals, these indestructible henchmen, which seems like it would take some of the tension out of the conflict, because if you have somebody who's indestructible, why is there any conflict? Why is there any tension? Why don't they just resolve the conflict from the beginning if they're immortal or if they're indestructible? Why don't they just solve the conflict straight from the get-go if they're indestructible? And Neil Gaiman, in this book, there are certain areas where his explanation is simply because that's how it works. And because Neil Gaiman deals more in soft magic systems than hard magic systems, he does get away with that. He gets away with it a little bit less in this book. But with the vibe of this book, it all seems kind of excusable. And it doesn't happen too often, but it does come up on the occasional part. And you're like, okay, you know, I'm fine with that. I'm fine with that because of how much of a good time I've had with the rest of the book. This happens with me all the time. Most books that I read have one singular aspect of them that kind of bother me a little bit. But I excuse that part because the rest of the book was such a fun time. I don't want to ruin it just for the ability to be like, it's like that snobbish thing, right? Like, this was a great book, but it has this one thing, and that's not appropriate for this type of literature. I don't care about that. I had a really good time reading this book. Another interesting thing about this book is that it was written as a TV show first by Neil Gaiman, and then written as a book that was released after the TV show, which I thought was interesting because usually it happens the other way around. As far as I understand, it's not very often that the person who writes the book is also the person who writes the script for whatever film or screen adaptation the book is based off of, or that is based off the book. This is a book where you have somebody fall through the rabbit hole and then slowly work their way back, and you just really, really enjoy your time during the rabbit hole. Now, the perspective I get reading this book is, the first book that I read from Neil Gaiman was American Gods. And American Gods was kind of like Neil Gaiman speaking as a Brit coming to North America, coming to America, and exploring America through his particular immigrant lens, and how he goes from place to place in this country to kind of explore it, and not just explore the way he sees it, but explore its themes, explore the implications of the immigrant experience and some aspects of that we might not have thought of. And he uses fantasy as a mechanism to bring out those themes, which is very, very well done, very astute. A few of my friends have pointed out some problems with American Gods. They weren't problems that bothered me at all. But the reason why I bring that up is because Neverwhere seems like almost like a warm-up for American Gods, where instead of exploring an entire country, he's exploring a city, and he's exploring a city he's much more familiar with. He's exploring it. It's kind of like a love letter to kind of the central hub of the country that he's from. And he really gets to kind of bring all of those things to life. You get that same sense from American Gods that you get in Neverwhere. And Neverwhere, I feel like it's not as heavy, not as brought together, not as epic in scope. Of course, it's covering one city instead of one country, but I feel like it still captures that same sort of feeling, that same sort of idea where you're kind of a tourist through this underground version of a world we thought we understood, and how that fantastical aspect can kind of bring to light various aspects of our real world in a way that we may not have considered before. And it kind of brings a little bit of magic into the real world, the way that Neil Gaiman is able to do it, not just with his stories, but with his excellent use of language. There are particular parts, there are particular paragraphs that Neil Gaiman writes where when you read them, you're like, that was a Neil Gaiman sentence. And the same way that if you play me a guitar lick and you can tell when it's B.B. King bending that string. You can tell when it's Neil Gaiman writing the prose. He'll write a sentence and then just have a little clause at the end, and it's the way he sees the actions, it's the way he sees the people, and it's the way he decides to tell you about them and what's happening that really is part of the magic of reading Neil Gaiman. Even though I haven't read Neil Gaiman for a long time, before this book, it had been several years since I touched a Neil Gaiman book, he will forever be one of my favorite authors for what he's able to do with the language, how he opened my eyes to what fantasy could be, the flavors of speculative fiction that resonate the best with me, and just an incredible ability to transport you into a world that is both our own, but seen through the lens less considered, and that's something I really, really enjoy taking a part of. So if you guys have read Neil Gaiman, please let me know what you think. You don't have to like him. I know a lot of people don't like Neil Gaiman, and that's completely fine. He's got a very particular style, and if that style doesn't resonate with you, it's probably really not going to resonate with you, but it definitely hooked onto me, and it's one of my favorites, so I hope it'll resonate with one of you too. Guys, let me know what you're interested in reading in 2021. I am opening up my year for many book recommendations, so I'm always happy to dig into new titles. If you have anything that's along the lines of Neil Gaiman, please let me know, because it's one of those things. Neil Gaiman is like Haruki Murakami, in which they were one of my favorite authors when I first read them. I've been trying to track down similar authors to them since, and I never quite find that thing. I get close, but never as close as I wish to be. As always, guys, if you enjoyed this video, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button. It would really help the channel out, and I will see you guys on the next video.